What I'm about to show you will completely change how you see entitled people forever, because buried in the court records of a seemingly ordinary Judge Judy case from last month is a secret so shocking that it reveals the true mastermind behind America's most notorious Karen epidemic. And in exactly 47 seconds, this secret would destroy not just one Karen's life, but expose an entire network of professional lawsuit scammers who have been gaming our legal system for millions of dollars. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. The Judge Judy courtroom fell dead silent as Karen Mitchell leaned into the defendant's microphone, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the wood like claws. Her voice cut through the air like a knife dipped in entitlement. "Your Honor, you're clearly discriminating against me because I'm a successful white woman who knows her rights. This is about race and class, and everyone watching can see it." The accusation was swift, calculated, and designed to bring down America's most beloved television judge in front of 12 million viewers. But what Karen didn't know was that hidden in Judge Judy's case file was a document that would expose Karen's darkest secret and reveal the shocking truth behind her 47 previous lawsuits. Judge Judy didn't flinch. She didn't look surprised. Instead, she slowly reached for a manila folder marked confidential that had been sitting on her desk the entire time. The kind of folder that makes defendants' blood run cold. Because what Karen Mitchell didn't realize was that Judge Judy had been waiting for this exact moment for 3 years. She had receipts that would destroy Karen's entire operation. She had evidence that would shock the legal community. And she was about to reveal a conspiracy so massive that it would send shockwaves through every courtroom in America and leave Karen not just speechless, but potentially facing federal charges. This wasn't just another frivolous lawsuit about sprinkler systems and roses. This was about to become the most explosive courtroom takedown in television history, one that would expose a multi-million-dollar scam operation and show America exactly what happens when a professional legal predator finally meets someone who has done their homework. The woman sitting in that plaintiff's chair wasn't just any Karen. She was patient zero of the modern Karen epidemic, the architect of a lawsuit scheme so sophisticated that it had fooled judges, lawyers, and insurance companies across 3 states for over a decade. Before we dive into this absolutely insane story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the American justice system, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because what I'm about to reveal will shock you to your core. Seriously. The next 20 minutes contain revelations so explosive that they're already being investigated by federal prosecutors. You won't want to miss a single second of how Judge Judy exposed the most dangerous Karen in America and brought down an entire criminal enterprise with nothing but facts, preparation, and 47 seconds of pure judicial fury. Trust me, this story will change everything you thought you knew about entitled people, and the ending will leave you absolutely stunned. Now let's see how America's toughest judge took down the mastermind behind a lawsuit scam so massive that it makes your average Karen look like an amateur, and how 47 seconds of truth destroyed a criminal empire that had been hiding in plain sight for years. The stage was set for what would become the most devastating courtroom expose in American television history. Karen Mitchell, sitting confidently in the plaintiff's chair with her designer handbag and perfectly styled hair, thought she had found her biggest payday yet by targeting an elderly Latina grandmother over a simple sprinkler dispute. But she was about to learn that Judge Judy Schindlin had been tracking her criminal operation for 3 years, and this case would become the trap that would destroy everything Karen had built. The irony was absolutely suffocating. Here was Karen Mitchell, a woman who had turned lawsuit abuse into a sophisticated criminal enterprise, about to face the one judge in America who had been secretly documenting her every move. The contrast couldn't have been more perfect. The master manipulator versus the legendary detective judge, the woman who thought she had perfected the art of legal extortion, versus the jurist who had seen every scam imaginable, the predator who had terrorized innocent families for over a decade, versus the protector who was about to end her reign of terror forever. But here's what makes this story absolutely mind-blowing. This wasn't just a random case that ended up on Judge Judy's docket. 3 years ago, Judge Judy's production team had received over 200 complaints about the same woman filing frivolous lawsuits across Arizona, Nevada, and California. Elderly homeowners, small business owners, contractors, even children's charities had all fallen victim to Karen's sophisticated scheme. She would target vulnerable people, file lawsuits with just enough merit to avoid sanctions, then pressure them into settlements that were cheaper than fighting her in court. It was legal extortion, and she had made it into a multi-million-dollar business. The backstory gets even more sinister. Karen Mitchell wasn't working alone. Court records that Judge Judy's team had been secretly collecting revealed that Karen was part of a network of professional plaintiffs who shared strategies, target lists, and even fake witnesses across state lines. They had identified the most vulnerable demographics, elderly minorities, single mothers, small family businesses, and had systematically attacked them using the legal system as their weapon. Karen had perfected the formula. She would research her targets for months, finding the smallest possible violations or disputes, then file lawsuits demanding just enough money that settling was cheaper than fighting. What made this confrontation absolutely explosive was that it represented everything that was wrong with America's legal system being weaponized by criminal enterprises, masquerading as legitimate plaintiffs. Karen had discovered that the system was so overwhelmed and settlement-oriented that she could essentially print money by filing barely legal lawsuits against people who couldn't afford to fight back. She had turned justice into a protection racket, and Judge Judy had been building a case against her operation for 3 years. The most shocking part? Karen had specifically targeted Judge Judy's show as her next victim. She had researched the show's settlement procedures and believed she could manipulate the television format to get a quick payout while generating sympathy from viewers. She had no idea that her appearance on the show was actually an elaborate sting operation, orchestrated by Judge Judy herself. The case about Mrs. Rodriguez's sprinkler system was just the bait. The real target was Karen's entire criminal network. Mrs. Rodriguez, the 67-year-old defendant, had been living in terror for 8 months as Karen escalated her harassment campaign. Phone calls at all hours, fake complaints to city agencies, threats of massive lawsuits that would destroy her financially. Karen had done her research and knew that Mrs. Rodriguez was a perfect target, an elderly woman on a fixed income who spoke limited English and would be intimidated by legal threats. But what Karen didn't know was that Mrs. Rodriguez had contacted Judge Judy's producers after seeing similar cases on the show, and that contact had triggered the investigation that would bring down Karen's entire operation. The national implications were staggering. If Karen's network was exposed, it could reveal similar operations across the country, potentially involving thousands of fake plaintiffs and millions of dollars in fraudulent settlements. Insurance companies, courts, and legal aid organizations had been tracking these patterns for years, but Karen's group had been too sophisticated to catch. They rotated identities, used different law firms, and carefully stayed below the radar thresholds that would trigger investigations. Judge Judy's television platform was about to become the courtroom where this entire shadow legal system would finally be exposed. What viewers were about to witness wasn't just another entitled Karen getting put in her place. This was the moment when America's most beloved television judge would reveal that she had been conducting a multi-year investigation into organized lawsuit fraud, and that the woman sitting in her courtroom was about to become the key that unlocked the biggest legal scandal in decades. The confidential folder on Judge Judy's desk contained evidence that would change everything, and in just a few minutes, Karen Mitchell would discover that her perfect crime had led her into the perfect trap. To understand why this confrontation would become legendary, you need to know exactly who these two women really are, because what's about to happen represents a collision between the most dangerous legal predator in America and the one judge who had been hunting her for years. Karen Mitchell wasn't your average entitled suburban mom with too much time on her hands. At 52 years old, this former paralegal had transformed herself into the most sophisticated lawsuit scammer in the country. Born in Phoenix to middle-class parents, Karen had discovered her twisted calling after a legitimate slip-and-fall case netted her $50,000 in 2012. But instead of being grateful, she saw an opportunity. She studied legal procedures obsessively, learned exactly how much she could demand without triggering serious scrutiny, and began building what prosecutors would later call the most organized civilian legal fraud operation in American history. Karen's criminal evolution was absolutely chilling. She had systematically identified the psychological profiles of targets who would settle rather than fight: elderly immigrants, single mothers, small business owners struggling with debt, anyone who viewed the legal system as too expensive and intimidating to navigate. She would spend months researching her victims, learning their financial situations, their fears, their vulnerabilities. Then she would manufacture disputes that were just plausible enough to survive initial legal review, knowing that her targets would pay thousands to make her go away, rather than spend tens of thousands fighting her in court. What made Karen truly terrifying was her intelligence and patience. She had created detailed spreadsheets tracking her success rates with different types of cases, different demographics of targets, even different seasons when people were more likely to settle. She networked with other professional plaintiffs, sharing strategies and even trading target lists like some twisted form of criminal commerce. By 2023, Karen's operation was generating over $300,000 per year in settlement income, and she had inspired copycats across the western United States. She was patient zero of a legal epidemic that was destroying lives and overwhelming courts. Karen's fatal flaw was her arrogance. After 11 years of success, she had become convinced that she was untouchable. She believed her system was foolproof, her research was impeccable, and her ability to manipulate both legal procedures and human psychology made her invincible. She had never faced real consequences because her victims were too scared, too poor, or too isolated to fight back effectively. This confidence had made her sloppy, and when she decided to target Judge Judy's television show, she was about to discover that her perfect predatory system had one devastating weakness. Judge Judy Sheindlin, at 81 years old, represented everything that Karen's criminal career had been designed to avoid. 25 years of television experience had given her access to resources that no individual victim could match. Her staff of researchers, investigators, and legal experts had been tracking patterns of lawsuit abuse for years, and Karen's name had been flagging their system since 2021. Unlike Karen's usual targets, Judge Judy had the time, money, expertise, and platform to fight back with devastating effectiveness. But here's what made Judge Judy absolutely lethal in this situation. She wasn't just a television personality or even just an experienced judge. She was a woman who had dedicated her entire career to protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Her television show had always been about giving ordinary people access to justice they couldn't afford in traditional courts. When her team identified Karen's predatory network, it wasn't just a professional challenge, it became a personal mission. The confidential folder sitting on Judge Judy's desk contained 3 years of meticulous investigation. Financial records, witness statements, pattern analysis, everything needed to expose Karen's operation and potentially trigger federal criminal charges. Judge Judy had turned her television courtroom into a trap, and Karen Mitchell was about to discover that her perfect victim had become her perfect nemesis. The trap was set, and Karen Mitchell walked right into it, with the confidence of a predator who had no idea she was about to become prey. She strutted into Judge Judy's courtroom wearing her signature calculated victim costume, a modest but expensive blazer, perfectly applied makeup designed to look naturally distressed, and the kind of controlled desperation that had fooled dozens of judges before. But this time, she was performing for an audience of one who had been studying her act for 3 years. Karen began her presentation with the polished delivery of someone who had turned courtroom manipulation into an art form. Your Honor, I'm here today because my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, has been systematically attacking my property and my peace of mind with her sprinkler system. Her voice carried just the right tremor of victimization as she pulled out her carefully prepared evidence folder. For 8 months, she has deliberately positioned her sprinklers to oversaturate my prize-winning roses, causing root rot and destroying thousands of dollars in landscaping. Every word was calculated, every gesture rehearsed, every claim crafted to sound plausible, enough to survive scrutiny, while being outrageous enough to justify her $5,000 demand. Judge Judy listened with the poker face of someone who already knew the ending to this performance, occasionally glancing at the confidential folder that contained Karen's entire criminal history. When Karen presented her evidence, Judge Judy's eyebrows barely moved as she examined the obviously doctored photographs of healthy roses that Karen claimed were damaged, the handwritten diary entries that read like fiction, and the expert witness statement from Karen's landscaper cousin who had suddenly become a certified horticultural damage assessor for this case. But then Judge Judy began asking the questions that made Karen's carefully constructed facade start to crack. Ms. Mitchell, you say the sprinkler damage occurred over 8 months. Can you explain why you waited until now to file this lawsuit? Karen's practiced answer about trying to work it out neighborly sounded hollow when Judge Judy followed up with, and during those 8 months of trying to work it out, did you file any other lawsuits against other neighbors or local businesses? The question hit like a lightning bolt because Karen suddenly realized that somehow Judge Judy knew about her other cases. Panic flashed across Karen's eyes for just a split second before she deployed her nuclear weapon. She straightened up in her chair, her voice switching from victim to aggressor in a heartbeat that revealed her true nature. Your Honor, I can see what's happening here. You're clearly discriminating against me because I'm a successful white woman who knows her rights. This is about race and class, and everyone watching can see that you're biased against people like me who understand the legal system. The accusation hung in the courtroom air like a toxic cloud. Karen had just played the card that she believed would paralyze Judge Judy with political correctness and force a settlement. She had no idea that she had just triggered the detonation of a 3-year investigation that would destroy her entire criminal empire in exactly 47 seconds. Judge Judy's face transformed into something that Karen had never seen before in any courtroom. Not anger, not frustration, but the cold, calculated expression of a hunter who had finally cornered her prey after years of patient stalking. She reached for that confidential folder with deliberate precision, her fingers moving like a surgeon preparing for the most important operation of her career. When she spoke, her voice dropped to that legendary whisper that had terrorized guilty defendants for over 2 decades, but this time it carried the weight of 3 years of investigation and righteous fury. "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Judy began, her eyes locked onto Karen like a laser targeting system. "You just made the biggest mistake of your criminal career. Because in exactly 47 seconds I'm going to destroy not just your ridiculous lawsuit, but your entire fraudulent operation that has been terrorizing innocent families for over a decade." The words hit Karen like a physical blow. The confident smirk that had been her trademark in dozens of courtrooms began to melt as she realized that somehow, impossibly, Judge Judy knew everything. Judge Judy opened the confidential folder and pulled out the first document. "Let's start with your claim about being a successful white woman. Ms. Mitchell, you're not a successful businesswoman. You're a career criminal who has filed 47 frivolous lawsuits in the past 11 years, generating over $300,000 in extortion payments from victims who were too scared or too poor to fight back." Each number hit, like a hammer blow, as Judge Judy began reading from what was clearly an FBI-level investigation file. "Your prize-winning roses? There's no record of you ever entering any gardening competition, ever purchasing premium landscaping, or ever caring about horticulture until you decided to target Mrs. Rodriguez 8 months ago." Judge Judy held up Karen's doctored photographs with the contempt reserved for evidence that insulted her intelligence. "These pictures were taken at a public botanical garden in Scottsdale, not your backyard, and our investigators have the timestamp metadata that proves it." But then Judge Judy delivered the blow that would haunt Karen's nightmares forever. "As for your discrimination accusation, how dare you weaponize social justice language to cover for your crimes? You know what real discrimination looks like, Ms. Mitchell? It's what you did to Maria Santos, the single mother you sued for $2,000 over a fake slip and fall in her small restaurant. It's what you did to Robert Chen, the elderly veteran you extorted for $1,500 with a fabricated property line dispute. It's what you did to the Hernandez family when you targeted their children's birthday party business with a lawsuit so ridiculous that it made them close down rather than fight you in court." Karen's face had turned ashen white as Judge Judy revealed that she knew about cases that Karen thought were buried in different counties, different states, different legal systems. The realization was dawning on her that she wasn't facing just a television judge, but someone who had been building a federal case against her for years. Judge Judy wasn't finished. "But here's what's really going to shock you, Ms. Mitchell. This entire case was a setup. Mrs. Rodriguez didn't just randomly end up in my courtroom. She contacted our producers after your harassment campaign became so severe that she feared for her safety. My investigators have been documenting your criminal network for 3 years, and you just walked into our courtroom and confessed to your pattern of targeting vulnerable minorities on national television." The final devastation came when Judge Judy revealed the document that would end Karen's career forever. "These are copies of correspondence between you and your network of co-conspirators in Nevada and California, discussing target lists, settlement strategies, and profit-sharing arrangements. You're not just a solo scammer, Ms. Mitchell. You're the ringleader of an organized criminal enterprise that spans 3 states and involves dozens of fake plaintiffs." Judge Judy's voice rose to its legendary courtroom volume. "Your case is dismissed. Your harassment of Mrs. Rodriguez ends now. And Ms. Mitchell, I suggest you contact a criminal defense attorney immediately, because copies of this evidence are already in the hands of federal prosecutors in Arizona, Nevada, and California." The courtroom fell into absolute silence as Karen Mitchell realized that her perfect crime had led her into the perfect trap, and 47 seconds of truth had just destroyed an 11-year criminal empire. Karen Mitchell sat frozen in her chair for exactly 3 seconds before her entire world imploded. "This is impossible. You can't do this to me. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue the network. I know my rights." But her threat sounded pathetic against the weight of federal evidence that had just buried her criminal empire, live on television. Judge Judy delivered the final crushing blow with surgical precision. "Ms. Mitchell, the only thing you'll be doing is explaining to federal prosecutors why you thought targeting elderly minorities was a profitable business model. Bailiff Byrd, please escort Ms. Mitchell out before she incriminates herself further." Within minutes of the episode airing, social media exploded with a force that shattered all records. As Karen Criminal Exposed reached #1 worldwide trending in under an hour. The hashtag 47 Seconds of Justice became the most viral courtroom content in internet history, generating over 50 million views across all platforms in the first 24 hours. If you're loving this epic takedown of America's most dangerous Karen, smash that like button and make sure you're subscribed because what happens next will absolutely blow your mind. Within 72 hours of this courtroom nuclear explosion, Karen Mitchell's criminal empire was completely annihilated. Federal prosecutors in Arizona, Nevada, and California simultaneously filed charges against her entire network of professional plaintiffs. Karen's real estate license was permanently revoked, her bank accounts frozen, and her luxury home seized as proceeds from criminal activity. But the most devastating blow came when 43 of her previous victims, empowered by seeing her destruction on national television, filed a massive class action lawsuit seeking over $2 million in damages. The ripple effects were extraordinary. Legal aid societies across America reported a 90% drop in similar frivolous lawsuits as other professional scammers realized their operations had been exposed. Mrs. Rodriguez became a hero to immigrant communities nationwide, proving that even the most vulnerable targets could find justice when someone with power decided to fight back. Judge Judy's 47-second takedown became required viewing in law schools as the perfect example of how preparation, patience, and principle could destroy even the most sophisticated legal predators. Karen Mitchell went from patient zero of the Karen epidemic to serving as a warning that in the age of social media and investigative television, nowhere was safe for those who prey on the innocent. If you enjoyed watching America's most dangerous Karen get exactly what she deserved, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more epic Judge Judy destructions. What did you think of that 47-second nuclear takedown? Let us know in the comments below. Share this with anyone who needs to see what happens when criminal Karens meet real justice. Hit that notification bell so you're the first to know when we drop our next courtroom annihilation video. This proves that no matter how sophisticated your scam, preparation and justice will always triumph over predators who think they're untouchable. Karen shouted, "You can't talk to me like that." What Judge Judy said next didn't just silence her. It exposed a secret so devastating that Karen's lawyer tried to stop the cameras. But it was too late. 42 million people were already watching, and what happened in the next 8 minutes would become the most viral courtroom moment in television history. Because hidden in Karen's designer purse wasn't just lipstick and car keys, it was evidence of something she never wanted the world to see. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. In the stale, recycled air of Studio 5 at Sunset Bronson Studios in Los Angeles, tension coiled like a serpent ready to strike. This wasn't the majestic marble halls of a federal courthouse. This was Judge Judy's domain, a television soundstage dressed to look like justice but where real consequences still landed with the weight of a gavel. The overhead lights hummed with electric anticipation, casting harsh shadows across the wood-paneled walls that had witnessed thousands of liars, cheaters, and entitled souls march to their reckoning. Camera operators adjusted their lenses with surgical precision, their red recording lights blinking like predatory eyes in the darkness beyond the set. This wasn't just another episode scheduled for a lazy afternoon time slot. The production crew could feel it, that rare electricity that meant something explosive was about to detonate, and their job was to capture every frame of the fallout. The gallery was packed beyond capacity, not with the usual studio audience members bust in from tourist hotels, promised a free lunch and a brush with daytime television fame. No, these were people who had called in favors, pulled strings, and camped outside the studio at 4 a.m. because word had leaked through the legal grapevine that today's case was special. Law students clutched notebooks with white knuckles, their pens poised to document what their professors could never teach them. Paralegal firms had sent representatives to watch what happens when entitlement meets accountability at 100 miles per hour. Social media managers sat in the back rows, phones angled perfectly to capture content their brands would kill for, fingers hovering over record buttons like gunslingers ready to draw. Even the bailiff, a man who had stood stone-faced through everything from screaming matches to fainting fits, kept glancing toward the door with an expression that suggested he knew something different was walking through it today. Karen entered the courtroom like a hurricane, convinced it was a gentle breeze. Her heels, Louboutin, red-soled, clicking with the confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered, announced her arrival 3 seconds before her perfume did. The scent was expensive, aggressive, the kind that doesn't ask for space but takes it. Her athleisure outfit cost more than most people's monthly rent. Designer leggings that probably required a waiting list. A cashmere wrap that draped with calculated casualness, and sunglasses. Gucci, oversized, perched on top of bleached hair styled into that particular shade of blonde that screams, "I'd like to speak to your manager," before a single word leaves the mouth. She carried a purse the size of a small suitcase, Designer label facing outward like a shield, stuffed with what appeared to be her entire life. Wallet, phone, makeup bag, and something else she kept touching nervously, checking to make sure it was still there. Her friend trailed behind her, phone already out, recording everything with the dedication of someone documenting what they believed would be Karen's triumphant victory lap. Karen smiled as she approached the plaintiff's table. Not a warm smile, not a nervous smile, but that particular expression of someone who has weaponized customer service. Complaints into an art form and fully expects the universe to bend to her volume setting. She scanned the room, with the assessment of a general surveying a battlefield she'd already won. Her eyes lingered on the cameras and something flickered across her face. Satisfaction, maybe even hunger. She wanted this televised. She wanted her righteous indignation broadcast into living rooms across America. She had prepared for this moment, practiced her victim speech in the mirror, rehearsed the exact tone of wounded dignity she would deploy when she explained how she had been wronged by people clearly beneath her tax bracket. Karen took her position behind the defendant's podium, arranging her designer purse just so, tilting her chin upward in that universal posture of someone who has confused confidence with evidence. 12 feet to her left stood the plaintiff, Marcus Chen, a 34-year-old small business owner whose auto body shop in Koreatown had been his father's before him and his grandfather's before that. Marcus wore a simple button-down shirt, pressed but not expensive, and slacks that had seen multiple dry cleanings but still served their purpose. No designer labels, no power accessories, just a manila folder clutched in slightly trembling hands, containing photographs, receipts, witness statements, and the kind of meticulous documentation that comes from a life spent proving yourself in a world that doesn't hand you the benefit of the doubt. His eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had spent 3 months trying to get Karen to simply pay for the damage she'd caused to his shop's front window. $1,200 in repairs that might as well have been $1 million for all the sleepless nights it had cost him. He'd almost given up. Almost decided that tangling with someone like Karen, someone with resources and rage and a vocabulary that included the phrase, "I'll sue you," wasn't worth the stress. But his wife had said something that changed his mind. If you don't stand up now, you'll spend the rest of your life stepping aside. So here he stood, folder in hand, heart hammering, trying not to look at Karen's smirk. And then there was Judge Judy. She sat elevated on the bench, but somehow it wasn't the height that created her authority. It was the stillness. While Karen fidgeted and preened, while Marcus fought to steady his breathing, Judge Judy simply existed in a state of complete, unshakable calm. Her black robe hung without a wrinkle, her reading glasses perched low on her nose, and her eyes, those famous unflinching eyes that had dissected 20,000 cases and found the lie in every single one that contained a lie, scanned the paperwork before her with the focus of a surgeon reviewing X-rays before a complex operation. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her face held the expression of someone who had heard every excuse, every justification, every sob story, and every indignant denial that the human mind could manufacture, and had stopped being impressed by theatrics somewhere around case number 47. Judge Judy was the underdog in the room, and she knew it. Not in power, never in power within these four walls, but in the war of perception that raged beyond the cameras. Karen had social media followers. Karen had friends recording for her defense. Karen had the armor of entitlement, the shield of never having faced real consequences, the weapon of a voice that had been raised in countless Starbucks and Target stores until managers gave her what she wanted, just to make her leave. Judge Judy had none of that currency. She had something Karen didn't understand. Decades of seeing through exactly this kind of performance and zero interest in applause. She wasn't here to win a popularity contest. She was here to read the evidence, hear the truth, and deliver a verdict that wouldn't care about Instagram followers or how many times someone claimed to know the owner. The bailiff stepped forward, his voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. Case number 47739, Marcus Chen versus Karen Whitmore. Plaintiff is suing for property damage in the amount of $1,200. Defendant denies all liability. The words were routine, procedural, the kind of legal boilerplate that opened 1,000 small claims cases. But the room understood. This was no ordinary dispute about a broken window. This was about something far more fundamental. This was about whether volume could defeat evidence, whether entitlement could outlast documentation, whether a person who had never been told no could survive 3 minutes under the gaze of someone who didn't care about their feelings, only their facts. Judge Judy looked up from her papers. She didn't look at Marcus first, despite him being the plaintiff. She looked directly at Karen, and for just a moment something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps. Karen saw a judge who would need to be managed, manipulated, convinced. Judge Judy saw a case she'd witnessed 10,000 times before, wearing a different designer outfit but speaking the exact same language of deflection. The judge's eyes flicked to the oversized purse Karen kept touching. Then back to Karen's face. Then to the papers. Then she did something unusual. She picked up a red pen, circled something on page 3 of the filing documents, and underlined it twice. Hard enough that people in the front row could hear the pen scratching against paper. The room wasn't quiet. It was hushed, a distinction that separates peace from tension holding its breath. People shifted in their seats with exaggerated care, afraid their movement might trigger the explosion everyone could sense building. The camera operators leaned in imperceptibly, instinct telling them to tighten their shots. Marcus Chen gripped his folder tighter, knuckles going white. Karen adjusted her sunglasses one more time, even though she'd already taken them off and placed them on the podium. And Judge Judy, reading glasses now removed and set down with deliberate finality, folded her hands and looked up at the two people standing before her. "Before we begin," Judge Judy said, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone about to say something that would matter, "I want to make something clear." She paused, letting the weight settle. "I've read both sides of this case. I've seen the evidence Mr. Chen brought. I've seen what Ms. Whitmore filed, or more accurately, what she didn't file." Karen's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "So let's save ourselves some time. If you came here thinking you could raise your voice loud enough to drown out the facts, you're in the wrong room." Judge Judy's eyes locked onto Karen with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. "If you came here thinking I care about your feelings more than his evidence, you've misunderstood what a courtroom is." The judge leaned forward slightly. "And if you came here thinking you can tell me what I can and can't say to you, well." The smallest hint of something that might have been a smile touched the corner of Judge Judy's mouth. "We're about to test that theory. Mr. Chen, tell me what happened." The clock on the wall ticked forward. Karen's hand moved to her purse again, that nervous checking gesture making sure whatever was inside stayed hidden. But the cameras had noticed. The audience had noticed. And Judge Judy, whose job for 25 years had been noticing what people tried to hide, had definitely noticed. The case was about to begin, but everyone in the room understood. The real battle had already started the moment Karen walked through that door thinking her usual tactics would work here. Because what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't have known until it was too late, was that Judge Judy wasn't just any judge tired of entitled behavior. She was the judge who had built a career on being the last person to ever back down. And in her courtroom, volume had never, not once, defeated evidence. This was going to be a masterclass, and Karen had just enrolled without reading the syllabus. Marcus Chen's voice cracked on the first word, then steadied as muscle memory from 3 generations of customer service took over. "Your Honor, on March 14th, the defendant backed her vehicle into the front window of my auto body shop. Full speed, shattered the entire plate glass." He opened his manila folder with hands that had stopped shaking the moment Judge Judy gave him permission to speak. "I have photographs from 3 angles, a police report, 2 witness statements from customers who were inside the shop, and repair estimates from 2 different glass companies. Both quotes came in at $1,200. He slid the evidence across to the bailiff, who carried it to Judge Judy's bench like he was transporting nitroglycerin. Judge Judy examined each photograph with the methodical precision of someone reading an X-ray. Her eyes moved from image to evidence to report, cross-referencing without speaking. 30 seconds of silence that felt like 30 minutes. Then she looked up at Marcus. "Were you present when this happened?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I watched it happen through the showroom window." Judge Judy made a note. "Did she stop immediately?" Marcus paused, remembering that moment, the sound of shattering glass still echoing in his nightmares. "No, Your Honor." She reversed, looked at the damage, then drove away. "I had to run into the street to get her license plate number before she turned the corner." The courtroom inhaled collectively. Even Karen's friend stopped recording for a second, lowering the phone in what might have been shock. Judge Judy's pen stopped moving. She looked up slowly, first at Marcus, then rotating her gaze toward Karen with the deliberate menace of a tank turret locking onto a target. "Ms. Whitmore, you left the scene?" Karen's entire demeanor transformed in an instant, from nervous defendant to wounded victim. Like flipping a switch she'd installed years ago and had used so many times the mechanism was frictionless. "Your Honor, I didn't leave the scene. I repositioned my vehicle because there was glass everywhere and I didn't want to damage my tires." Her voice carried that particular tone of explaining something obvious to someone dim. "I was going to come back inside, but he..." She jabbed a finger toward Marcus. "He came running at my car screaming in a language I couldn't understand, and I felt threatened. I had every right to leave a situation where I felt unsafe." Judge Judy's eyebrow rose exactly 1/4 of an inch. A movement that people who watched her show regularly knew meant someone had just made a catastrophic miscalculation. You felt threatened by the man whose property you just destroyed? Karen opened her mouth, but Judge Judy raised one finger. Don't answer yet. I'm still processing the physics of how you were positioned your vehicle after driving it through a window. The judge looked back at the police report. According to Officer Martinez, when he arrived at your residence 3 hours later, because Mr. Chen provided your plate number, you told the officer, and I quote, "I don't know what he's talking about. My car has been in my garage all day." Karen's face flushed. I was confused. It had been a stressful day. I'm sure it had been, Judge Judy said, her voice dry as desert sand. Destroying property and fleeing tends to be stressful. Do you have any evidence to present? Photos of your vehicle? Proof that the damage Mr. Chen is claiming couldn't have come from your car? Karen straightened her shoulders, reached for her purse, then seemed to think better of it and withdrew her hand. I don't need evidence, Your Honor. Anyone with common sense can see this is clearly a scam. He probably broke his own window to collect insurance money and now he's trying to get paid twice. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, and for 3 long seconds simply stared at Karen with an expression that could have flash-frozen boiling water. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had reached the absolute limit of patience with a particular brand of human behavior. Ms. Whitmore, let me explain something to you about how my courtroom works, because you seem to have confused it with a Facebook comment section. She leaned forward. In here, common sense doesn't override evidence. Your feelings don't override facts, and your voice, no matter how loud you make it, doesn't override documentation. Karen's hands gripped the podium. Are you saying you're not even going to listen to my side? I'm listening right now, Judge Judy said. I'm listening to you tell me you have no evidence, no witnesses, no photos, no documentation of any kind, and your defense is that everyone else is lying. The judge picked up the police report again. I'm also listening to Officer Martinez's report, which says when he asked you directly if you'd been involved in an accident that day, you said no. Not I was confused, not I felt threatened. You said no. Because Karen started. Because you lied, Judge Judy finished. And now you're here in my courtroom, asking me to believe that the man with photographs, witnesses, and a police report is the liar, while you, with absolutely nothing but attitude, are telling the truth. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Marcus Chen's grip on his folder loosened slightly, his breathing evening out as he watched Judge Judy do what he'd prayed someone would finally do. Refused to let Karen's volume control the conversation. Karen's friend had raised the phone again, recording frantically, and Karen's eyes flicked to that camera like a lifeline. She was playing to an audience of future social media followers, people who would see a 60-second clip and rally to her defense against the mean judge. But Judge Judy wasn't playing to any audience. She was reading the evidence, and the evidence was painting a picture that no amount of indignation could repaint. Do you have anything else to say, Ms. Whitmore? Judge Judy asked. Before I make my ruling? Karen's mouth opened, and everyone in the courtroom, from the stenographer to the last row of the gallery, knew that what came out next would either save her or bury her. And based on everything they'd witnessed in the last 8 minutes, salvation wasn't on the menu. Karen took a breath, her hand moving once more toward that oversized purse, and said the words that would detonate everything. You can't talk to me like that. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. You can't talk to me like that. Karen's voice wasn't just loud, it was seismic, echoing off the studio walls with the full force of someone who had spent a lifetime deploying that exact phrase to bend retail workers, restaurant managers, and customer service representatives to her will. Her face flushed crimson, her finger pointing at Judge Judy like a weapon she'd used 1,000 times before, and never once had it failed to make someone apologize, backtrack, offer a discount, or simply give up. She took a step forward, her designer heels clicking against the floor with the rhythm of someone advancing toward victory. I came here for justice, not to be disrespected by someone who clearly has already made up her mind. Judge Judy didn't move, didn't blink, didn't react. She simply sat there, hands still folded on the bench, looking at Karen with the expression of someone watching a toddler throw a tantrum in a grocery store, mildly interested in an anthropological sense, but entirely unmoved by the performance. The silence that followed Karen's outburst stretched and stretched, becoming its own entity, its own presence in the room. 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 8 seconds of Judge Judy simply staring while Karen's chest heaved with righteous indignation, and the cameras captured every micro-expression of someone realizing, perhaps for the first time, that the usual script wasn't working. Then Judge Judy spoke, and her voice carried the temperature of absolute zero. Actually, I can. Those 3 words, actually I can, detonated like a controlled explosion. Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice dropping into that surgical tone that had dissected 1,000 egos before Karen's. This is my courtroom. Not your living room. Not a store where you can demand a manager. Mine. And in here I don't answer to you. You answer to me. She picked up the police report, holding it like evidence at a crime scene. You want respect? Bring evidence. You want consideration? Bring truth. You want me to take you seriously? Stop lying. Karen's mouth opened, but Judge Judy raised one finger. I'm not finished. Judge Judy straightened the papers before her with decisive finality. I've heard enough. Judgment for the plaintiff. What $200 for repairs? Karen's eyes went wide, plus court costs and filing fees. Total, $1,485. Karen exploded. This is insane. You didn't even listen. Judge Judy's gaze could have cut steel. I listened to your lies, your deflections, and your complete lack of evidence. What I didn't listen to was your volume, because volume isn't proof. She banged the gavel once, sharp, final. We're done here. Karen grabbed her purse, clutching it like a shield. This is going viral. Everyone will see how biased you are. Judge Judy's slight smile was colder than her previous expression. Please do post it. Post every second. Because America loves watching people learn that consequences exist. Karen turned toward the exit, her heels clicking frantically against the floor, her friend trailing behind still recording, phone shaking as she struggled to keep up. But as Karen reached for her purse to shove it under her arm, something happened that would change everything. The zipper, stressed by her aggressive grip, split open. And from inside, tumbling in slow motion that the cameras captured in perfect high definition, fell a stack of photographs, at least 30 of them, scattering across the courtroom floor like evidence raining from heaven. The bailiff moved first, instinct and training kicking in as he bent to gather them. His face changed as he looked at the first photo, then the second. Then he looked up at Judge Judy with an expression that said everything. Judge Judy's voice cut through the chaos. Bailiff, bring those to me. Karen lunged forward. Those are private property. You can't. But the bailiff was already walking toward the bench, photographs in hand. Judge Judy took them, and as her eyes scanned the first image, her entire demeanor shifted from judicial satisfaction to something far more serious. Ms. Whitmore, these are photographs of Mr. Chen's shop taken from across the street, dated 2 weeks before the incident. She looked up, her voice deadly quiet. You were surveilling his business? The courtroom erupted, not in noise but in that collective gasp that comes when a mystery suddenly reveals itself to be far darker than anyone anticipated. Karen stood frozen, her face draining of color. Marcus Chen's confusion transformed into horrified understanding. Judge Judy flipped through more photos. Images of Marcus arriving at work, images of his schedule, images of the shop's security camera positions. This wasn't an accident at all, was it, Ms. Whitmore? Judge Judy's voice carried across the stunned silence. This was intentional, premeditated, and you came into my courtroom thinking you could lie your way through it. Karen's friend lowered the phone. Even she had stopped recording. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time since entering the courtroom, she had nothing to say. Judge Judy held up the photographs like a prosecutor presenting the smoking gun. Bailiff, I'm ordering these photographs entered into evidence and forwarded to the district attorney's office. This isn't just a civil matter anymore. She looked at Karen with something beyond contempt, disappointment in humanity itself. You didn't just damage property and lie about it. You planned it, documented your surveillance, and then had the audacity to come here and call him a scammer. Marcus Chen stood motionless, his manila folder forgotten, staring at the photographs with the expression of someone realizing they'd been targeted, hunted, and he'd never even known. Judge Judy's gavel came down one more time. Ms. Whitmore, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you exercise it, because anything you say now can and will be used against you in criminal court. The courtroom cleared slowly. People moving like witnesses leaving a crime scene, unsure of what they just watched transform from small claims into something far more sinister. Marcus Chen walked out with his judgment and something more valuable, vindication. The photographs proved what he'd always suspected but could never prove. Karen hadn't accidentally hit his shop. She'd targeted it. Why? The investigation would later reveal a property dispute, a business rivalry, a grudge that had festered into obsession. But in that moment, none of the details mattered as much as the principle Judge Judy had enforced. Evidence defeats ego, every single time. Within 48 hours, the clip exploded across every platform. Not the edited version Karen had planned to post, the full footage including the photographs spilling from her purse like a confession she couldn't take back. The view count hit 42 million. News outlets called it the case that proved premeditation live on television. Legal analysts dissected it in classrooms. But the most viral moment wasn't the photographs, it was Judge Judy's 3 words, "Actually, I can." Because embedded in those words was a lesson that transcended one courtroom, one case, one entitled woman learning consequences. It was the answer to every person who'd ever been told they couldn't speak truth to power, couldn't stand up to someone louder, couldn't fight back against someone with more resources. Judge Judy, the underdog and designer authority facing social media influence, had proven something fundamental. Truth doesn't need volume. It just needs evidence. And when you have evidence, no amount of shouting can silence it. Marcus Chen later said in an interview that he almost didn't file the lawsuit. Almost decided, $100 wasn't worth facing someone like Karen. But then I remembered my father's words. If you don't stand up, you teach them they can knock anyone down. He stood up. He brought his folder. He let the evidence speak. And when Karen's purse betrayed her secrets, it wasn't luck, it was justice finding a way to surface. The way truth always does when someone refuses to let volume win. The question isn't whether you'll face someone who thinks they're above accountability. You will. The question is, will you have your evidence ready? Will you stand firm when they raise their voice? Will you remember that courtrooms, real ones, metaphorical ones, the everyday battles for fairness, don't reward the loudest person? They reward the most prepared. If this story reminded you that truth is your superpower, drop a comment sharing your moment of standing up when it mattered. Hit subscribe because we're bringing you more stories where evidence defeats ego, and smash that notification bell, because the next case we cover will show you what happens when someone thinks they can fake their way through life until they meet the one person who won't play along. Your evidence is your armor. Gather it, use it, win with it. This dramatized story is inspired by courtroom principles and accountability dynamics, created for entertainment and reflection on justice, evidence, and the power of standing firm against intimidation.
Karen said, "You're just jealous of me," to Judge Judy in the courtroom. Then Judy's next sentence didn't just break the room, it exposed a secret Karen had been hiding for years. The courtroom fell into a suffocating silence, the kind that makes every breath feel too loud, every shift in your seat a betrayal of the tension hanging in the air. This wasn't just another small claims case. This was a public unraveling, and everyone in that room could feel it coming like a storm on the horizon. The case on the docket seemed simple enough on paper, a dispute over unpaid rent and property damage between a landlord and a former tenant. But the moment Karen Mitchell walked into that courtroom, clipboard in hand, designer handbag slung over her shoulder, and a smile that screamed confidence bordering on arrogance, you knew this wasn't going to be ordinary. She moved like someone who'd never lost an argument in her life, her heels clicking against the floor with the kind of authority that demanded attention. Her hair was perfect, her outfit meticulously chosen, the kind of polished presentation that said, "I have my life together, and you don't." She wasn't just there to win. She was there to prove a point. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Across from her stood the defendant, a woman named Maria Santos, clutching a worn folder filled with wrinkled receipts and handwritten notes. Maria's clothes were clean but simple, her hands calloused from years of work, her eyes tired but determined. She didn't have Karen's polish or Karen's confidence, but she had something else, a quiet resolve that came from knowing the truth. She'd been Karen's tenant for 3 years, and according to Karen, she'd left the property in shambles, refusing to pay the last 2 months of rent. But Maria's story was different, and the documents she carried told a version Karen didn't want anyone to hear. Judge Judy sat at the bench, her sharp eyes already assessing both women, her expression giving away nothing. She'd seen thousands of cases, heard every excuse, every lie, every half-truth. She had a reputation for cutting through nonsense like a hot knife through butter, and she didn't tolerate fools or frauds. She leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled, waiting for the theatrics to begin. She knew this type of case. She knew this type of plaintiff. And she had a feeling Karen Mitchell was about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating the quiet ones. Karen stepped forward, her voice dripping with the kind of polite condescension that makes your skin crawl. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case. Ms. Santos violated her lease agreement, caused significant damage to my property, and refused to pay rent. I have documentation, I have photographs, and I have witnesses. She's trying to paint herself as a victim, but the facts speak for themselves. She said it all with a smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes, the kind that said she'd already won before the gavel even dropped. Maria stood silent, her grip tightening on her folder, her jaw set. She'd been dismissed, belittled, and ignored for months. But not today. Not here. Judge Judy glanced at Maria, then back at Karen, and in that brief moment, something flickered across her face, recognition, maybe, or suspicion. She'd seen Karen's type before. The landlords who nickel-and-dimed their tenants, who exploited desperation, who hid behind legalese and fake smiles. And she had zero patience for it. Ms. Mitchell, Judge Judy began, her voice calm but carrying an edge sharp enough to draw blood, before we get into your documentation and your photographs and your witnesses, let me ask you something simple. Did Ms. Santos ever complain to you about the condition of the property before she moved out? The question hung in the air, and for just a fraction of a second, Karen's smile faltered. She may have mentioned a few minor issues, Your Honor, but nothing that warranted. Judy cut her off. Minor issues. Define minor. Karen shifted her weight, her confidence flickering like a candle in the wind. A leaky faucet, some cosmetic concerns, nothing serious. Judy's eyes narrowed. A leaky faucet. Cosmetic concerns. And did you fix these minor issues, Ms. Mitchell? The courtroom leaned in. Maria's eyes stayed locked on Karen, waiting. Karen cleared her throat. Your Honor, I'm a busy woman. I manage multiple properties. I responded to her complaints in a reasonable time frame. Judy leaned forward, her expression icy. That's not what I asked you. Did you fix them? Yes or no? The room held its breath. Karen's polished exterior was starting to crack, and everyone could see it. This wasn't just about unpaid rent anymore. This was about to become something much, much bigger. Karen's jaw tightened, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the edge of the podium as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. She forced a smile, the kind that looked more like a grimace, and tilted her head slightly as if Judge Judy had just asked her to explain basic mathematics to a child. Your Honor, with all due respect, I did what was required of me as a landlord. Ms. Santos is trying to deflect from her own failures as a tenant. She's looking for someone to blame because she couldn't meet her obligations. Her voice carried that smooth, practiced tone of someone who'd rehearsed this speech in the mirror, someone who believed that confidence alone could substitute for truth. Judge Judy didn't blink. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the bench, her eyes fixed on Karen like a hawk watching a mouse scramble across an open field. Ms. Mitchell, I've been doing this for a very long time. And one thing I've learned is that when someone doesn't answer a simple yes or no question, it's because the truth doesn't serve them. So let me ask you one more time, and I suggest you think very carefully before you answer. Did you fix the issues Ms. Santos reported to you? Yes or no? The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Maria stood motionless, her folder still clutched to her chest, her eyes glistening but her expression steady. She'd waited months for this moment, endured sleepless nights, faced eviction threats, been called a liar and a deadbeat by a woman who smiled while she twisted the knife. And now, finally, someone was asking the questions Maria had been screaming into the void. Karen's smile disappeared entirely. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, she looked like she might actually tell the truth. But then her pride kicked in, that stubborn, venomous pride that had carried her through life believing she was untouchable. Your Honor, I don't think it's fair that I'm being interrogated when I'm the plaintiff here. I'm the one who's been wronged. I came here seeking justice, not to be put on trial. Judge Judy's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. The bailiff glanced at the gallery. The court reporter's fingers paused over the keys. Even the cameraman seemed to lean in, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Judy leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving Karen's face. "Ms. Mitchell, let me explain something to you. This is my courtroom. I decide what's fair. I decide what questions get asked. And if you don't like it, there's the door." She pointed toward the exit, her finger steady as a compass needle. "But if you walk out that door, you forfeit your case. So I suggest you answer the question, or I'll make my ruling right now based on your refusal to cooperate." Karen's face flushed red, a deep, angry crimson that spread from her neck to her cheeks. Her eyes darted to Maria, then back to Judge Judy, and in that moment, the mask slipped completely. "Fine," she snapped, her voice sharp and brittle. "No, I didn't fix everything she complained about. Because half of what she complained about was ridiculous. She expected me to renovate the entire apartment for her. She wanted granite countertops and new appliances and fresh paint like she was living in a penthouse. She was paying $800 a month, Your Honor. $800. She should be grateful she had a roof over her head at all." The gallery gasped. A few people whispered to each other, shaking their heads. Maria's eyes widened, not in surprise, but in vindication. There it was. The truth Karen had been dancing around, finally dragged into the light. Judge Judy tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable but her voice colder than ice. "Grateful. She should be grateful. Is that what you said?" Karen realized her mistake immediately. She tried to backpedal, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Your Honor, I didn't mean it like that. I just meant that she was getting a good deal, and instead of being appreciative, But Judy cut her off with a single raised hand, and Karen's voice died in her throat like a candle snuffed out by a sudden gust of wind. "Ms. Santos," Judge Judy said, turning her attention to Maria for the first time since the case began. "Tell me what you complained about. And be specific." Maria took a shaky breath, her voice soft but clear, every word measured and deliberate. "Your Honor, the heating stopped working in November. I called Ms. Mitchell 6 times, and she kept saying she'd send someone, but no one ever came. My daughter and I slept in our coats for 2 months. The bathroom ceiling was leaking so bad that mold started growing on the walls. I have pictures. I showed them to her, and she said it was my fault for taking 2 long showers. The stove didn't work. 2 of the burners were broken, and when I asked her to fix it, she told me to use a hot plate. I wasn't asking for granite countertops, Your Honor. I was asking for basic human decency." The courtroom was silent again, but this time the silence wasn't tense. It was heavy, weighted with the kind of truth that settles over a room like fog. Judge Judy's expression softened, just barely, as she looked at Maria. Then she turned back to Karen, and the softness vanished, replaced by something that looked almost like disgust. "Ms. Mitchell," Judy said slowly, her voice cutting through the air like a blade, "you stood in my courtroom and tried to paint this woman as irresponsible and ungrateful. You brought a case against her for unpaid rent and property damage. But it sounds to me like you were the one who failed to meet your obligations. You let her live in dangerous, uninhabitable conditions, and when she couldn't take it anymore, you tried to make her the villain." Karen's hands were shaking now, her polished exterior completely shattered. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the words that would haunt her forever slipped out in a desperate, venomous hiss. "Your Honor, she's just jealous of me. She's jealous because I own property and she doesn't. She's jealous because I have success and she's struggling. This whole thing is about envy, not facts." The room erupted. People in the gallery gasped, some shook their heads in disbelief, others muttered angrily under their breath. Maria's face went pale, her hands trembling as she gripped her folder tighter. And Judge Judy, for the first time in the entire case, smiled. But it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just been handed the keys to total victory. "Jealous," Judy repeated, her voice soft, almost amused. "Ms. Mitchell, let me tell you something about jealousy. And trust me, after I'm done, you're going to wish you'd kept your mouth shut. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, her hands folded calmly on the bench, her eyes locked on Karen with the kind of intensity that made grown adults squirm. The courtroom was so silent you could hear the air conditioning vent humming in the corner. Everyone waited, breath held, knowing that whatever was about to come out of Judge Judy's mouth would change the trajectory of this case entirely. "Ms. Mitchell," Judy began, her voice measured and deliberate, each word chosen with surgical precision, "you think Ms. Santos is jealous of you. You think she looks at your designer handbag and your polished shoes and your multiple properties and feels envy. Let me tell you a story, and I want you to listen very carefully, because by the time I'm done, you're going to understand exactly how wrong you are." Karen stood frozen, her face still flushed, her mouth slightly open as if she wanted to interrupt but didn't dare. Maria's eyes were fixed on Judge Judy, hope flickering across her tired features like the first light of dawn. 30 years ago, Judy continued, her voice taking on a softer, more reflective tone, "I was a young lawyer in family court. I thought I knew everything. I'd gone to law school, passed the bar, and I was ready to change the world. One of my first cases involved a woman named Ruth. Ruth was a single mother, working 2 jobs, barely scraping by. She'd been taken to court by her landlord for breaking her lease early. The landlord claimed she owed him thousands in damages and unpaid rent." Judy paused, letting the parallels sink in. The courtroom leaned forward collectively, hanging on every word. "The landlord," Judy went on, "was a successful businessman. Nice suit, expensive watch, briefcase full of documents. He stood in front of the judge and painted Ruth as irresponsible, ungrateful, someone who didn't appreciate the opportunity he'd given her. He said she was jealous of his success, that she resented him for being a property owner while she struggled. Sound familiar, Ms. Mitchell?" Karen's face had gone from red to pale, the color draining from her cheeks like water circling a drain. She said nothing, her hands gripping the podium so tightly her knuckles turned white. "But here's what that landlord didn't know," Judy continued, her voice growing stronger, more pointed. "Ruth had left that apartment in the middle of winter because the heat didn't work. Her 5-year-old daughter had developed pneumonia from sleeping in the cold. Ruth had called him 17 times. 17. And every single time, he told her he'd get to it, that she was being dramatic, that she should be grateful she had a place to live at all." Maria's hand went to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. The gallery was completely still, every person riveted by the story unfolding before them. "Ruth lost that case," Judy said, her voice tinged with old anger, old regret. "The judge believed the landlord because he had documentation, because he looked successful, because Ruth couldn't afford a good lawyer. She was ordered to pay him $3,000 she didn't have. And you know what happened to Ruth?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Karen looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "She declared bankruptcy," Judy said flatly. "Lost custody of her daughter temporarily because she couldn't provide stable housing. Spent years rebuilding her life from nothing. And that landlord? He kept renting out that broken apartment to desperate people who had no choice but to take it. He kept collecting rent, kept threatening lawsuits, kept hiding behind the law while people suffered." Judge Judy leaned forward now, her eyes boring into Karen with an intensity that could melt steel. "I couldn't help Ruth back then. I was too young, too inexperienced, and the system failed her. But I made myself a promise that day, Ms. Mitchell. I promised that if I ever had the power to stop people like that landlord, people who exploit the vulnerable and then have the audacity to call them jealous, I would do it without hesitation." The courtroom was electric now, the air charged with the weight of revelation. Maria was openly crying, her hand pressed against her chest. The gallery members were nodding, some wiping their own eyes. "So when you stand in my courtroom," Judy continued, her voice rising with controlled fury, "and you tell this woman that she's jealous of you, what you're really doing is admitting that you know exactly what you did to her. You know you failed her as a landlord. You know she suffered because of your negligence. And instead of taking responsibility, you're trying to make it about her character instead of yours." Karen's lips trembled. She tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no words came out. "But here's what you don't know, Ms. Mitchell," Judge Judy said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone to strain to hear. "Here's the part that's about to break this room wide open." She paused, letting the tension build to an almost unbearable level. "Ms. Santos isn't jealous of you. She doesn't envy your properties or your success. Because what you don't know is that Maria Santos owned her own home once. A beautiful home that she bought with her own money, that she worked for years to afford. And she lost it because of people exactly like you." The courtroom exploded with gasps and murmurs. Karen's face went completely white. And Maria stood there, tears streaming down her face, finally being seen for who she really was. Judge Judy straightened the papers on her bench, her movements deliberate and final. The courtroom held its collective breath, waiting for the ruling that would seal Karen's fate. "Here's my judgment," Judy announced, her voice ringing with authority. "Ms. Mitchell, your case is dismissed. Not only are you not getting a penny from Ms. Santos, but you're going to pay her. I'm awarding Ms. Santos $5,000 for living in uninhabitable conditions, emotional distress, and the sheer audacity of you wasting this court's time with your nonsense." The gallery erupted in applause, quickly silenced by the bailiff, but the energy was undeniable. Karen's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks now, all pretense of composure completely shattered. She tried to speak, her voice cracking. "Your Honor, please, I can't afford." "You can't afford it?" Judy's eyebrows shot up. "You own multiple properties, Ms. Mitchell. You can afford designer handbags and manicures, but you can't afford to compensate a woman you exploited? Spare me. You have 30 days to pay her, or I'll place a lien on one of your precious properties. We're done here." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the chamber like thunder. Karen stood there, shaking, humiliated, her world turned completely upside down in less than an hour. Maria, on the other hand, looked like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She wiped her tears, clutching her folder to her chest, and whispered, "Thank you," so softly that only those closest could hear it. As the courtroom began to clear, something unexpected happened. Karen didn't storm out. She didn't huff and puff and blame everyone else. Instead, she stood there, frozen, staring at Maria across the aisle. And then, slowly, as if her legs were moving against her will, she walked toward her. Maria tensed, unsure of what was coming. The bailiff moved closer, ready to intervene if necessary. But Karen stopped a few feet away, her voice barely above a whisper, broken and raw. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, fragile and uncertain. I didn't see you. I just saw tenants and rent and numbers. I didn't see people. I didn't see you." Maria looked at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded, just once. Not acceptance, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. "Maybe now you will," Maria said quietly, and turned to walk away, leaving Karen standing there with the wreckage of her arrogance scattered at her feet. The story didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. In fact, that's when it really began. Within hours, clips of the case had exploded across social media. The moment Judge Judy said, "By that measure, Ms. Mitchell, you are bankrupt," became an instant viral sensation. Comment sections flooded with thousands of people sharing their own stories of landlords who'd exploited them, of being called ungrateful when they asked for basic repairs, of fighting battles against people who had money and power while they had nothing but the truth. Maria's story resonated in a way that transcended the typical courtroom drama. People didn't just watch it for entertainment. They watched it and saw themselves, saw their mothers, saw their neighbors. The video accumulated millions of views, with titles like, "Judge Judy Destroys Entitled Landlord," and, "The Most Powerful Courtroom Moment Ever Recorded." But beneath the clickbait headlines was something real, something that touched a nerve in the cultural conversation about housing, dignity, and what we owe each other as human beings. Local news outlets in Maria's city picked up the story. Reporters tracked her down, wanting interviews, wanting to hear more about her journey from homeowner to struggling tenant to vindicated survivor. Maria, who'd spent years feeling invisible, suddenly found herself at the center of attention she never sought. But she handled it with the same quiet grace she'd shown in the courtroom. "I didn't do this for attention," she told one reporter, her daughter standing beside her. "I did it because I couldn't stay silent anymore. And if my story helps even one person stand up for themselves, then everything I went through was worth it." Her words inspired action. A local tenants' rights organization reached out to Maria, offering her a position as an advocate. They'd seen how she carried herself, how she documented everything, how she'd refused to be intimidated despite having every reason to give up. Within weeks, Maria was helping other tenants navigate disputes with negligent landlords, teaching them how to document violations, how to stand firm, how to believe they deserved better. She became the voice for people who'd been silenced for too long. But perhaps the most unexpected development involved Karen herself. In the days following the judgment, she disappeared from social media, stopped responding to calls, and according to her property manager, spent most of her time locked in her house. Friends who reached out received no response. The woman who'd walked into that courtroom radiating confidence and superiority had been fundamentally broken by what happened. 3 weeks after the case, Karen did something nobody expected. She sold 2 of her rental properties. Not because she had to, not because of the $5,000 judgment, but because she couldn't look at them the same way anymore. Every time she drove past them, she saw Maria's face. She heard Judge Judy's words, "You are bankrupt." And she couldn't shake the devastating realization that it was true. With the money from the sales, Karen made anonymous donations to 3 local organizations, a tenants' rights group, a housing assistance program, and a medical debt relief charity. She didn't announce it. Didn't post about it on social media. Didn't try to rehabilitate her public image. She did it quietly, privately, because for the first time in her adult life, she was doing something that wasn't about her ego. But Karen's transformation went deeper than writing checks. She reached out to her remaining tenants, scheduling meetings with each one personally. She asked about repairs they'd requested, issues they'd been afraid to report, problems they'd learned to live with because they assumed she didn't care. And then, methodically, she fixed them. Every single one. The heating systems that barely worked. The leaking roofs. The broken appliances. She hired contractors, paid for upgrades, and did it all without raising anyone's rent. One tenant, an elderly man who'd been living with a broken air conditioner for 2 summers, broke down crying when Karen personally came to tell him it had been replaced. "I don't understand," he said, confused by this sudden change. "Why now?" Karen looked at him, her eyes carrying a weight they'd never held before. "Because someone showed me that I was wrong. And I'm trying to do better." The local tenants' rights organization, the same one that had hired Maria, noticed the changes. They investigated, expecting it to be a publicity stunt, but found it was genuine. Karen had fundamentally changed how she operated, not because she wanted praise, but because she'd been forced to confront the ugliest parts of herself in the most public way possible. Meanwhile, Maria continued her advocacy work, her case becoming a teaching tool for others fighting similar battles. She'd turn on her computer and see comments from strangers thanking her, telling her she'd given them courage, telling her they'd finally stood up to their own landlords because of her example. 2 women, forever changed by one courtroom moment. One learning what she'd lost. The other reclaiming what she'd always had. 6 months after that courtroom confrontation, something remarkable happened. Maria received an envelope in the mail, no return address, just her name written in careful handwriting. Inside was a check for $1,500 and a single piece of paper with a handwritten note, "For your daughter's education. You deserved better, and I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that. KM." Maria stared at the note for a long time, her fingers tracing the letters. She knew exactly who it was from. She thought about returning it, thought about all the reasons she had every right to reject anything Karen Mitchell offered. But then she looked at her daughter doing homework at their small kitchen table in the modest but safe apartment they'd moved into after the judgment, and she decided to accept it. Not because she needed Karen's money, but because accepting it meant acknowledging that people could change, that redemption was possible, even for those who seemed beyond reach. The lesson from that courtroom moment spread far beyond those two women. It rippled outward like waves from a stone thrown into still water, touching people who'd never met Maria or Karen, people who'd only watched a clip on their phones while waiting in line at the grocery store or scrolling through social media late at night. But the impact was real, and it was profound. The first lesson was about jealousy itself. When someone accuses you of being jealous, it's almost never about you. It's about them. It's about their insecurity, their need to believe that everyone wants what they have because it's the only way they can validate their own choices. Karen spent years believing that her tenants envied her properties, her success, her lifestyle. But the truth was, she was the one consumed by fear that without those external markers of success, she was nothing. Maria didn't want Karen's properties. She wanted dignity. She wanted safety. She wanted what every human being deserves, to be treated like they matter. And when Karen finally understood that, when she realized that Maria's struggle wasn't about envying what Karen had but about surviving what Karen had failed to provide, everything changed. The second lesson was about power and how we use it. Power isn't inherently good or evil. It's neutral. But what we do with it, how we wield it, that's what defines us. Karen had power over Maria as her landlord, and she used it to exploit rather than to serve. She saw Maria's vulnerability and treated it as an opportunity to cut corners, to ignore problems, to maximize profit at the expense of another human being's well-being. But Judge Judy also had power in that courtroom, and she used it differently. She used it to amplify Maria's voice, to demand accountability, to remind everyone watching that justice isn't just about laws and contracts, it's about recognizing the humanity in every person who stands before you. The third lesson was about the stories we carry. Maria carried the story of losing everything and fighting to rebuild. Karen carried the story of success at any cost. Judge Judy carried the story of Ruth, the woman she couldn't save 3 decades ago. Every single person in that courtroom, every person watching the clip later, carried their own stories of times they'd been dismissed, exploited, or underestimated. And when those stories collided in that moment, when Maria's truth finally had a platform and Karen's facade finally cracked, it reminded us all that our stories matter. Not just the triumphant ones, not just the ones that make us look good, but especially the painful ones, the humbling ones, the ones that show us at our most vulnerable and most real. The fourth lesson was the most important: change is possible, but it's painful. Karen didn't walk out of that courtroom and immediately become a better person. She walked out humiliated, angry, broken. She spent weeks in denial, then anger, then finally, slowly, painfully, in acceptance. Real change doesn't happen in a moment. It happens in the days and weeks and months afterward, when you have to face yourself in the mirror and decide who you want to be. Karen chose to change not because it felt good, but because staying the same had become unbearable. And that's how real transformation works. It's not inspirational music and montages. It's uncomfortable conversations, difficult apologies, and consistent action even when nobody's watching. Maria's advocacy work continued to grow. She spoke at community forums, helped draft local tenant protection ordinances, and trained others to document violations and fight back against exploitation. She never forgot where she came from, never forgot the feeling of standing in that cold apartment wearing a coat because the heat didn't work. And she made sure that every person she helped knew they weren't alone, that their struggle mattered, that they deserved dignity. Judge Judy continued doing what she'd always done, cutting through nonsense and demanding accountability. But that case stayed with her, too. She kept a copy of the transcript in her desk, a reminder of why she did this work, a reminder that sometimes one moment of truth could change multiple lives. As for the millions of people who watched that clip, commented on it, shared it with friends and family, they took away their own lessons. Some saw it and finally reported their own negligent landlords. Others saw it and examined their own behavior, their own use of power, their own tendency to dismiss people they considered beneath them. Teachers showed it in classrooms to spark discussions about justice and empathy. Social workers referenced it when training new advocates. It became more than just a viral video. It became a cultural touchstone, a moment that crystallized something people had been feeling but couldn't quite articulate. The next time someone tries to dismiss you by calling you jealous, remember Maria standing in that courtroom, folder clutched to her chest, finally being heard. Remember that your truth has power. Remember that dignity isn't something someone grants you, it's something you already have, and no one can take it away unless you let them. And if you're ever in Karen's position, if you ever find yourself with power over someone vulnerable, remember that you have a choice. You can exploit, or you can serve. You can dismiss, or you can listen. You can see people as dollar signs and inconveniences, or you can see them as human beings deserving of basic respect. Because in the end, real wealth, real success, real power isn't about what you own or what you control. It's about who you are when nobody's forcing you to be better. It's about the legacy you leave in the lives you touch. And it's about understanding that the person you're tempted to dismiss, the person you think is jealous of you, might just be the person who teaches you the most important lesson of your life, if you're brave enough to listen. If this story hit you the way it hit me, I need you to do something right now. First, smash that subscribe button because we bring you powerful real-life stories like this every single week that remind you what really matters in life. Second, hit that like button so YouTube shows this to more people who need to hear it. And third, this is the most important one, share this video with someone today. Maybe they're dealing with their own Karen, maybe they're fighting a battle where they feel invisible, or maybe they need a reminder that standing up for yourself with dignity is the most powerful thing you can do. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been accused of jealousy when you were really just asking for basic respect? I read every single comment, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Let's build a community where everyone's voice matters.